Zohran Mamdani just announced something that absolutely stunned me, and all to do with a simple act of snow shoveling.
We're utilizing 33 DSNY vans and 2 DSNY buses to transport shovelers where they're needed faster. And for those who want to do more to help your neighbors and earn some extra cash, you too can become an emergency snow shoveler. Just show up at your local sanitation garage between 8 a.m. and 1 p.m. tomorrow with your paperwork, which is accessible online at nyc.gov/snow, and you can get started right away.
Sorry, what was that? Let's get into it. All right, so New York Mayor Zohran Mamdani is a member of the Democratic Socialists of America. And this is what they have to say about the Save America Act, which would require people to provide proof of US citizenship when they register to vote and provide photo ID before they cast their vote. The Democratic Socialists of America roundly condemns this threat to political participation in civic life and urges the Senate to reject this bill. This bill is part of an escalating campaign to reverse the gains of the civil rights movement and marginalize working class Americans who do not have access to documentary proof of citizenship. Our candidates for office, such as Zohran Mamdani, stand firm against racist voter ID laws and secret poll taxes like the Save America Act. So asking people to show ID when voting is racist. But if you want to pick up your shovel and help out your city in the middle of a brutal snowstorm, what's the rule again?
We're utilizing 33 DSNY vans and 2 DSNY buses to transport shovelers where they're needed faster. And for those who want to do more to help your neighbors and earn some extra cash, you too can become an emergency snow shoveler. Just show up at your local sanitation garage between 8 a.m. and 1 p.m. tomorrow with your paperwork, which is accessible online at nyc.gov/snow, and you can get started right away.
What an absolute stunning hypocrisy. You need to pass more legal hurdles in Zohran Mamdani's America to shovel your community snow for $19 an hour than you do to take part in an election that decides the outcome of a country. Make that make sense. Now, Mamdani and his supporters can dress this all up as two separate issues. One's about payment, the other one's about voting, and they can put all the blame for this whole thing on the big bad federal government and claim they're just doing what the good law tells them to do.
Here in New York City, we follow the law, and it's federal law to require certain forms of identification in order for someone to actually be paid for this kind of a job. And so that's what we're asking for, 2 forms of identification. It's a long-standing city program. It's a long-standing city policy.
Okay, but that doesn't pass as a coherent argument because first off, for the land of the free to require those legal hurdles for community service is crazy. The government shouldn't really be standing in the way of people doing things that are for the common good if they don't have a good reason for doing so. So even if you do have all the ID that Zohran Mamdani requires you to have, the fact that you'd have to produce it, go stand in line in a snowstorm somewhere and fill out forms is enough to tell a few good Samaritans that maybe it's not all worth it. That's something Donald Trump brought up when he talked about this.
You know, the mayor of New York, and he's a very nice person. I met him, but his ideology is not too good. But we're having a massive snowstorm right now, and I've heard that he's asked people to come out and help shovel the snow. Okay, so you get a shovel and you start shoveling, right? What the hell? You're not going to help too much, but you can help.
And the second, far bigger issue is that forcing people to show their ID is all well and good in just one area, is to admit that the government has a right to need ID for basic areas of governance to ensure that things are all above board. And when you admit that, it becomes very hard to say there is no need for government ID to be handed over in another area, like voting in an election. John Kennedy on Fox News Today sums it up well.
He must think there's an award for being stupid. I mean, the American people look at this stuff and they're aghast. You're going to require somebody to show not one form, but 2 forms of ID in order to shovel snow, but not to vote. I mean, it's a silly dispute. Everybody has ID. Everybody could get ID. I can tell you the way my people back in Louisiana feel about it. They feel about it they tell me, if you can't figure out how to get an ID, you probably shouldn't be voting.
You know what? As stupid as all these ID checks on shoveling snow are, I hope it's a wake-up moment for Mamdani and the Democrats on this important issue. Because the only people in America that are against voter ID laws are Democrat politicians. A Rasmussen poll conducted just last month shows that voter ID laws are actually popular. From the report, 74% of likely US voters believe that requiring photo ID to vote is a reasonable measure to protect the integrity of elections. Now, that's nearly unchanged from last July, so it's not like as if this is one wild moment where the people care about this stuff. Just 16% of people disagree and 10% are not sure. Let's go party lines, all right? 84% of Republicans say that requiring photo ID to vote is a reasonable measure to protect, as do 65% of Democrats and 74% of voters not affiliated with any major party. 33% of likely voters believe that requiring photo ID at the polls discriminate against some voters, but a majority, 56%, don't think so. 11% not sure. But that is totally different to what voters are hearing from the Democrats, like the chair of the Democrat National Convention, Ken Martin.
There are lots of people in this country that don't have voter IDs, right? Whether it's seniors, whether it's young people, we know that this would have a dramatic impact on married women. Reality is this would actually be one of the largest poll taxes on the American people, forcing people to go and get an ID to vote. There is no massive voter fraud in this country, so this is a solution search of a problem that is actually going to disenfranchise millions of American voters. All right. It's not worth it.
So that's one of the most senior Democrats in the country, completely out of step with the American people on a key issue. The longer the Democrats keep banging this drum, the worse their party is going to perform at elections. Scott Jennings, the Republican on CNN, he's got this great idea of 80-20 issues. As a party, if there's an issue that 80% of Americans support, you need to be on that side or you look stupid. So clearly, voter ID is an 80-20 issue. And when you have Mamdani telling press conference after press conference after press conference that it's absolutely fine and dandy for the state to require forms of identification to shovel snow, you can't turn around and support something so dumb as no voter ID checks on elections. Let's talk to Robby Soave. Let's talk to Robby Soave, senior editor at Reason and the host of The Rising on Hill TV, which everyone should be watching. Robby, thank you so much for joining us. So it seems to me that in Zohran Mamdani's socialist utopia world, you would show more signs of identification if you wanted to shovel snow for your neighbor than if you wanted to take part in a federal election. Is that the vibe I'm getting here?
Yeah, you pretty much nailed it. That's what Zohran said. That's what the city requires. Going to become an emergency snow shoveler. You have to prevent multiple forms of identification. But of course, Democrats like Zohran are fighting tooth and nail the SAVE Act, which would require voters in our elections to have some kind of proof that they are a citizen. It's not difficult to obtain that proof, by the way. It's very, very, very easy. It's cheap. It can be done. Now, look, I'm a libertarian. I also find it annoying having to procure government forms every now and then, but for our elections, I'd say that's okay. And 80% of my fellow citizens agree with me, including 70 or 80% of virtually every identity group that Democrats claim opposes this or would be harmed by this because Democrats think they're too stupid to figure out how they can fill out forms. It's not the case. Everyone supports it. So it's pretty uncontroversial, and yet they fight it.
Yeah, there's a couple of things I want to get into there. So one, you say, the Democrats, they're saying, it's this awful thing that people need to go through to get to voter ID. It's so hard the second someone gets married that they should fight the realms of government to prove that they're still the person they are. Or elderly people would just be completely confused by the whole process, which to me isn't an argument to restrict voter ID. It's a reason to reform government laws. Like, it shouldn't take someone solving 3 riddles and wrestling a minotaur in a labyrinth somewhere to be able to get government ID. Like, just reform the laws that are already there.
Yeah, and look, I mean, dealing with the IRS is annoying and stressful and irritating. That doesn't mean I don't have to pay taxes. I wish it were the case. I wish my annoyance at our tax authorities meant I didn't have to do it that way. But it doesn't. Voting actually is not compulsory. So if you find the entire process so baffling and so incomprehensible, you can opt not to vote. I mean, that's not a popular expression. People, take the right very seriously, which is good, and they should. But you can get a passport quite easily. You can get any form of identification. I think it takes about $10 to get the form of identification they're going to be requiring under this law, the SAVE Act. And Democrats in every other context are the party of, in the U.S., of vigorously following rules prescribed by government and prescribed by bureaucrats. They love paperwork. They love making sure you have a permit for your little lemonade stand. Oh no, we can't, do that without a permit. That kind of thing. The snow shoveling shows that. It's a textbook example of that. So why they would be so worked up in the voter identification case really makes no sense. Except they think wrongly, in my view, honestly, that it will cost them votes, but that's not even clear that that's the case in the sort of Trump voting constituency. It works that way.
Yeah, it's one of the, I had some poll statistics earlier on in my editorial showing, as you say, just how popular voter ID laws are, even with Democrats. And I know it's like this, I hear it from Scott Jennings, maybe he came up with it, maybe it predates him, but the idea of the 80-20 issues, right? As a party, you want to be in issues where you're on the same side as 80% of the population. And if you keep finding yourself on the side of the 20% on issues such as voter ID, that's going to cost you in the long run. It just seems like when even a majority of Democrat voters are on the side of voter ID reforms, they are essentially arguing on behalf of no one. It's just such it's a niche position to take on a policy that a whole lot of people care about. Where is the win in the end of it?
Well, they're arguing on behalf of progressive elites, which hold a lot of sway among the Democratic Party. It's not arguing on behalf of any specific mass of people. It's just what's important to them ideologically, and it does follow from an idea they used to have that Democrats had a lot of low propensity voters in their coalition, and that if you inconvenience people even a little, you would be disproportionately turning away people who would vote for Democrats. Now, that thinking is, I would argue, outdated, because in the Trump era, Trump actually benefits from a lot of low propensity voters. And the people who are worked up and furious about politics and are going to go to the ballot box no matter what are disproportionately voting at this point for Democrats and against Trump. Polls showed us in the last election that, Trump won the popular vote. If everyone in America had been forced to vote, he would have won it by even more. So that would be, I guess, a criticism here of Republicans being so obsessed with this. I think their thinking's outdated too. They're like, oh, we'll stop the people who vote Democrats from voting. I don't see much evidence that's the case. It should just be, we only want people who we know are citizens of the country to vote, and that's not controversial, and we don't care who it helps or who it hurts. It probably doesn't make much difference on the margins anyway. That's how it should be.
I want to move on to another strange appeal to low propensity voters. This one coming from Gavin Newsom. So Gavin Newsom, I think, is the most obvious, secret in the world that he's going to be running in the next election campaign. And he's got his new memoir coming out. Just so happens to be in time for some sort of campaign to get off the ground, get his name out there, get some buzz going. He's at a crowd in Atlanta, and he's talking about his memoir, and he wants to relate to people in the room. Now, it's been reported that this was a majority black crowd. You were pointing out on the Rising that it's actually not a majority black crowd, it's a majority white crowd. But I still think, Atlanta, a city where the black crowd is such a big part of the vote, it still contextualizes the comments in such a way. But here's what he told the voters.
I'm like you. I'm no better than you. I'm a 960 SAT guy. and I'm not trying to offend anyone, trying to act all there if you got 940. But literally a 960 SAT guy. I cannot, you've never seen me read a speech because I cannot read a speech. Maybe the wrong business to be in.
There's two things I want to get into about this. The first being Gavin Newsom. The biggest issue for him becoming the Democrat candidate, to me, is the fact that he suffers from what I call rich Democrat face. There's no one I've ever seen that has a face that says more, I was born with a silver spoon in my mouth, I've been voting Democrat since the day I was born, and I'm going to continue that way. So he does need to overcome that in some respects if he's going to go with the regular crowd. Bill Clinton had the same affliction, but he was very popular with average voters because he could empathize with them. I don't see it with Gavin Newsom. But the second thing is, And in a way, it harks back to this is how the Democrat elite see the average voter, in the idea that I'm like you because I too have terrible SAT scores and struggle to read, is in a sense saying that I think anyone below a certain salary level is just a, knuckle dragging caveman. Like, we'll start off with that one. Why would he go for that?
Yeah, in fairness to him, there was an idea introduced on social media that he was primarily talking to black people, and there's a long history of white liberal elite Democrats talking down to black people, thinking somehow that would make them more amenable to them. And giving him a pass on that here because it was a mixed audience. It wasn't a specific audience of one race or the other.
Can I
still
just
thought
jump
it
in
was,
there? Sorry to interrupt. I just want to jump in there because, yes, Sean Hannity had this big editorial talking about how he was talking to black voters. I did think it was quite kind of interesting. We showed it on screen before, which is why I'm jumping in, which is Gavin Newsom reacting to Sean Hannity in quite a profanity-laden way, saying, you didn't call out President Trump when he posted the ape video and you're calling African nations blank holes, but you're going to call me racist. So I thought it was interesting that he didn't defend himself saying I was talking to a white crowd. I suppose that wouldn't make the situation any better, but I'm sorry I did cut you off there.
right. Maybe he had no idea the makeup of the crowd he was talking to. Sometimes the lights are on you when you're on stage and you actually can't see the audience at all. But that's neither here nor there. The point is that if you are someone like Gavin Newsom, you are a white liberal elite. You described him accurately as a born with a silver spoon in his mouth. He is a member. He was a governor of California. He is liberal elite white. But to have influence and importance and power in progressive circles having not entire control over the Democratic Party, but a lot of influence, you need to be some kind of oppressed person. It helps to belong to a marginalized identity group. The victimhood identity has been elevated to the most important cultural cachet in progressive politics. If you're someone who looks like Gavin Newsom, who has Gavin Newsom's background, well, you don't have that. So what do? So then you could talk about your psychological health. Now, probably if you're running for president, you don't want to suggest that you're psychologically unhealthy. So you go to some kind of some physical disability or handicap. He says he's dyslexic, which for all I know, he might be. Although I have to recall, President Biden exaggerating, as far as I can tell, how badly he'd been affected by a stutter to explain why he was not coherent at answering questions from the media. No, it's not the stutter. It's that he's too old to be president at this point. So we are now used to this being a cover for a more serious issue, but it's telling that he wants to say he's part of an oppressed group, and that's why you should vote for him, because that's what they all end up doing.
But that's so interesting to me because you would think, like, if you wanted to empathize with people that didn't come from the silver spoon in the mouth, I think it's such an incredible way for progressives to say that, okay, I can't have had everything go my way since I was born because I'm dyslexic or because I have a stutter. When I think the majority of American voters would rather hear someone, and Trump gets into this, right? Trump, obviously born with a whole lot of privilege, born from an incredibly privileged background, but he was someone that in 2016 and 2024 was able to empathize with regular voters because he could just run on cost of living stinks, jobs are going away, the economy's in shambles, which people empathize with, but they don't empathize with the idea that because you're dyslexic, you see the world like me, when it's seeing the world on these like social classes rather than economic, which is where I think the classes are.
Absolutely. You just have to be authentic to who you are. So to your point, Trump who is beloved by working class people, they identify with him culturally and socially, but he doesn't pretend that he didn't grow up wealthy and influential. He brags. He talks very proudly about how he took a fortune and translated it into an even bigger fortune. Then you have someone like his vice president, J.D. Vance, who is someone who comes from an absolutely deplorable working class, impoverished background, who triumphed over that and made something for himself and wrote about that experience in Hillbilly Elegy, which is a very influential book. You just have to be who you are. Gavin Newsom just needs to honestly say, yeah, look, I am the guy I look like, but I nevertheless care about the unfortunate, and here are the policies that I support to help underprivileged people or working class people or struggling people or whatever he's running on. But because Democrats specifically think they need the identity hook to appeal to people, because that's what works in the Democratic enclaves. It doesn't matter for the general election. It doesn't matter for most Americans, for the persuadable independent voters that they want to bring into the coalition that they need to win. Those people don't care about identity, as far as I can tell at all. But if you're going to be a speaker on a college campus, you got to have some identity thing going for you.
Yeah. So Newsom has this slip up, and maybe it's like a 24-hour news cycle thing. We all move on in a couple days. But I think like that off the back of a similar big slip up of AOC over in Munich, where she, tried to talk about foreign policy issues, revealed to the world that she didn't really know where Venezuela was on a map and didn't really have a policy on Taiwan. Gaffes really stick to candidates, I feel, when they speak to or prove something that we all kind of secretly thought deep down about a candidate, and they can't wash that away. So with AOC, she's always seen as like, okay, she's got the viral Twitter moment, she's on TikTok, but does she have the policy background? She has those clips in Munich, and we kind of go, yeah, we were all right about that. Gavin Newsom, we go, can this guy with such background, such privilege, California coastal elite liberal, can he ever empathize with voters? When he comes out and says, I'm like you because I'm dumb, it shows that no, he can't, because he doesn't understand and he doesn't really have that connection to them. I bring this up because I think the next Democrat candidate for president is either Gavin Newsom or AOC. I don't think any of the other people really have a chance. Are these the kind of gaffes that can kind of sink a campaign before it starts, or do you think it's still those two with everyone else running for third?
I mean, look, those two are by far the most likely in my view. I think other people, I think there are chances. A lot of things can happen. It's still many years away. We don't know for sure, but I think Gavin Newsom has a lot of advantages, and AOC, the reason she cannot be counted out at all is that she will not, as far as I can tell, have competition in the furthest left lane of the Democratic Party. There is it's a minority of voters, obviously, in the country, but there is a group of people who want a Bernie Sanders style hard left progressivism, and Bernie Sanders in 2020. Well, he almost got the nomination with all the powers against him in 2016. And then in 2020, he had to contend with Elizabeth Warren, his ideologically similar person, fighting him for the exact same voters. AOC, as far as I can tell, is not going to have somebody eating into her base. Now, do these kinds of gaffes matter so many years in the future? I thought she really betrayed a fundamental lack of foreign policy knowledge for the reasons you mentioned, including, you didn't mention this one, but she tried to make fun of Marco Rubio for suggesting that the cowboy culture of the American Southwest is partly inherited from Spain, because this was in Europe, trying to talk about our connections to Spain. And she made fun of him for saying that, even though it's absolutely true that descends from the vaqueros and from Spanish and then Mexican, and then that makes its way into Texas. Like, that's just real history. So I don't know what she was so confused about there. That ignorance, I hope it sticks with voters. I really hope it does. But she clearly has something. People do like her. There are people in this country who voted for Trump and for her as their, in New York, as their representative. She has crossover appeal that, I don't understand it, but it exists. And just because I don't understand it, that doesn't mean it's not there or it shouldn't be commented on.
Yeah, I think to me, it really boils down to she just seems like, and it's weird to say for someone that got elected into office from the age of 30, but she screams outsider. Like, people just don't want anyone that comes from within the system. So it's Trump in 2016, it's AOC in 2024. Like, obviously, if you sat down and looked at their policies, background, thoughts on things, you would go, there's no through line to say that you would support one and the other at the same time. But I think if you just treat them as one big, Democrat, Republican, other, like there's just a massive other vote because people are so sick of the system.
That's true. People hate the establishment. Candidates always want to portray themselves as anti-establishment, even if they are, by any reasonable definition of the word establishment, part of it. Trump still portrays himself as anti-establishment, and maybe to some extent that's true, because he has policies that clash with certain political interests and moneyed interests that have long been a part of the Republican Party. He's fought years of conservative orthodoxy on economics with the tariffs, for instance. Maybe that counts then as being anti-establishment, even though he's the leader of the Republican Party and the conservative coalition and the president, again, for a second term. But it is certainly helpful to portray yourself as an outsider, and that is something AOC does quite well. I thought her best moments in Munich were when she tried to pivot to her issue, which is, economic inequality. And she talked about the rise of the populist right, or the, what she describes as it being fascist adjacent, and saying that, well, this is where people go if we as Democrats fail to give them a healthy populism of the left that addresses their economic insecurity. That's what she's going to do successfully, is talk about all other issues and move them back toward the kind of class struggle economic thing that made Bernie Sanders so popular, that she learned in part from him. And that's proven to be formidable in the past. It really has. Can't count it out.
You brought up Bernie Sanders before. I want to switch focus to that because he's given a big speech to Stanford, I believe it is, recently, which you covered on The Hill really well. And he's talking about big tech, and he's talking about the fears that are coming when the world's handed over to tech oligarchs, and he's quite worried about what that means for the future. We've got a clip here.
When we have more income and wealth inequality than we have ever had, the AI revolution is being pushed by the very, very wealthiest people in our country, including folks like Elon Musk, Jeff Bezos, Larry Ellison, Mark Zuckerberg, and Peter Thiel, and others. But a small number of multi-billionaires are investing huge sums of money in AI and robotics. And the question that we've got to ask ourselves is, why are they doing this? Are they doing it because they want to improve the standard of living?
All right, so he's really calling out the tech billionaires there. We know who he's talking about. Elon Musk, Sam Altman, Zuckerberg, the big tech billionaires. And he's coming from a very, classic Bernie Sanders. I care about the working class. I care about making sure that people are protected, strong unions, etc. And there was another part which you honed in on, which I want to play now as well.
Tax breaks to these large companies, they will create these technologies. But the point of this evening, this afternoon, is to say that while these technologies can be very useful, they will not be useful unless we have a degree of control over what these guys are doing. So it's not just technology for the sake of technology. It's technology to improve human life. All right? Please.
So the message I'm picking up here is that from Bernie Sanders saying, I don't really understand where AI is going. I don't really understand what these tech billionaires have in store for us. And because I don't understand it, therefore the government could control it. Now, what I worry about is, look, I've got one foot in each camp on AI. I think it can be an incredible force for good. I can also go full, Unabomber when thinking about what some of the AI stuff could come for us. But what I certainly fear is that if we hand over regulatory control to the government, we've got people who've got no idea about technology, that seem to be proud of the fact that they don't know anything about technology, now deciding the regulatory environment under which technology can be developed. That seems way worse than whatever Bernie Sanders is scared of.
Yes, absolutely. People who are ignorant of the technology behind this. Every time these tech leaders are hauled before Congress and questioned by our members of Congress on both sides, by both Republicans and Democrats, I'm horrified at the basic lack of knowledge of the people who represent us. It doesn't help that the people who represent us are very, very, very old, oldest Congress ever. That's one problem. But Bernie Sanders is also betraying an ignorance of basic economics there, because he posits these things as opposed. He says, well, he wants technology if it's going to improve the standard of living, but he's worried that this is just about already very wealthy people further increasing their wealth. But we know that the incentive for tech people to generate more wealth for themselves it's not some kind of trade-off, that in the process of generating this more wealth, they'll provide more benefit to the customers of these technologies that will improve living standards as innovations in medicine and so many other things improve our in energy, improve our life expectancy. One of the number one disease-related ways you can die in the U.S. is in a car crash. Kills tens of thousands of people a year. We might have self-driving cars everywhere in the country in a decade. And so you can't just think about, well, my point is there's a cost to being too cautious, right? That's thousands and thousands of lives saved every year if we move quickly on that technology. And Bernie Sanders wants a moratorium on new data centers, which will be necessary to generate the energy that's going to power these AI innovations. I'm not for no regulation. Obviously, AI, we've all seen them, this science fiction dystopias can go in bad directions. There needs to be some regulation. We need to have smart people figuring out these problems. Trust me, I'm not with just anything Mark Zuckerberg wants, he gets, is not where I land on this at all. It's not where the American people are. But there is a danger in moving as slowly as Bernie Sanders wants to move in terms of what it would mean for us, what it would mean for our lack of competition with respect to adversarial foreign powers that are moving fast on this. That's where I think his concern just totally falls apart. Because what he really is concerned about, I think, is protecting a specific kind of union job that destruction in the marketplace of labor is tough when something new comes along and your job gets outcompeted. Like that's a rough experience, but it just can't be the government's policy to protect the existing jobs, whatever they are, because then you have to fight the car when it replaces the horse and buggy. You know what I mean? Everything. You have to fight automation. You have to fight things that make goods and services cheaper, housing cheaper. Everything has to be opposed on that argument. It just doesn't make any sense if you follow it to its logical conclusion.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought up that horse and car analogy, because I think back to like some of the other seismic periods of turnover in economic history, right? Like the Industrial Revolution. All these new technologies get brought in, which completely renders a whole lot of the workforce, useless, but at the same time didn't create unemployment because there's new jobs to find. I think about the rise in genetically modified crops, right? Scary. We're bringing all this new technology in. What's that going to mean for farmers? So many people so many people can be replaced by a giant machine now. But then you don't have that same level of unemployment coming through. People do find new jobs. Like I'm sure the AI tech revolution, when it happens, 40 years from now, there's a pretty good chance that the most popular job in America is something that no one is employed in at the moment because we don't know that we need it. And I also think, you bring up there, it's hard when you lose your job. I have so much sympathy for anyone that's going to be told that skill you've been harvesting within yourself for 30 years is now no longer marketable because it's done by a robot. But at the same time, you think about genetically modified crops, think about the Industrial Revolution, think about the car replaced by a horse. There is like the social good element of the world has benefited more from unleashing this new technology than suppressing it, because food is safer to eat, food is more abundant, it's easier to get around, it's easier to live because of this new technology.
Right. The smart thing to do, and unfortunately, this is a policy that is not very popular. People tend to say, I don't want a handout. I just want a good job. I want my job protected. But really, economists will say it should be the other way around. If it's economically efficient to eliminate your job, and that's going to increases productivity and profits and wealth, but then some of that wealth should be, the government should redistribute it to you so that you are not so negatively impacted. That's not necessarily even a libertarian mindset at all, because I'm not in favor of a massive redistribution. But that makes more sense than trying to keep us all doing backbreaking farming labor, because that's what we know how to do and that's what we're good at. To your point, right? Fewer people do that kind of work, and we have more food and we feed more people, and fewer people globally starve because it gets replaced and people do new things. New jobs are created. I have no doubt that a lot of very tedious research-related work in the legal field, in other fields of where research is done, is going to be quickly automated by AI at a very high level, and then that's going to cause a lot of creative destruction. That's going to happen, and it's going to be hard for some people, but it's going to lead to massive gains in productivity and thus prosperity, and new jobs are going to open up because of that. I can't predict to you what those are. I can't even describe them. I can't imagine them. But it's going to free people to be more creative, in some cases to do more of what they love. Like people today are making a living. Young people are making a living posting videos of themselves on TikTok and Instagram, doing dance videos or makeup tutorials. Like there are more creative ways to make a living that were not available to the serfs, because all you could do was dig a hole and plant something, because we didn't have all this wonderful technology. So there's so much missing the forest for the trees that goes into when people talk about the destruction that's going to occur. That doesn't mean it's all going to be good or that we have to be totally hands off in terms of the regulatory environment. Of course not. But just saying a blanket statement, we must halt this, we must pause this, as Sanders is doing, I find so irresponsible on an economic, moral, on every level, philosophically wrong.
Yeah. I want to sidetrack to another way because there's another example of regulatory bodies and governments wanting to get involved in technology that they don't understand. And while we can all feel warm and fuzzy inside, it's actually going to create more issues than it is, and it's spreading around the world. So it's under 16 social media bans, which is something that is being championed by the psychologist Jonathan Haidt, who I really respect. I think he's a fantastic writer and a fantastic thinker, but it has influenced policy to where in Australia now, if you want to join Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, certain social media, not all, but certain social media apps, and you're under 16, you legally can't. Like, the platform will be legally liable if they give you an account and you're found to have an account if you're under the age of 16. It's apparently been such a roaring success. I haven't seen the data. Teens seem to be getting around it pretty quickly, but it's such a roaring success that other countries around the world are doing it. And I've even seen that Donald Trump is it's on his radar. He's not said anything about it, but it's something in the world of things that Donald Trump is thinking about. But at the same time, we aren't knowing the technology. Teens are getting around it, but we're bringing in all these regulatory frameworks on individual companies and teenagers that we might not actually need.
Yeah, I'm very wary of doing this. The most important reason being that the content on social media is speech. And in the US, that is something we just really do not regulate, or we regulate more lightly than just about anything you can think of. The First Amendment is very clear that the government cannot regulate this kind of thing. This is news and information and people talking to each other. And to say that this app and this app and this site and this platform, teenagers can't use this. Oh, but this one they can, right? Because as you were saying, it's selective what it applies to. That seems so dangerous to me. I'm not a conspiracy theorist at all, but I do worry about giving the government too much power to decide what you can and cannot read and see and talk about. That's very, very worrisome. I don't know. How can we expect, and I fully admit there are harms to too much social media use can be bad for young people and bad for anyone. Too much of anything tends to be bad for you. And I support parents making different choices for their kids. I support discussions of ways to mitigate some of the harms of social media. I think they're not quite as well founded as Jonathan Haidt makes them out to be. He and I have debated this in numerous different venues. He thinks the research is very compelling. I see a lot of bad for, some users, sure. But a lot of other young people are using this to talk to their friends and to get news and information. I don't know where this conversation is going to appear, but I host a show that goes on YouTube. Clips of it are shared to Instagram and to Twitter X and to Facebook. And I'm going to say that a 15-year-old that in my country in 3 years is going to be voting for who they think is president, that is going to have all the responsibilities of adulthood in a short while, but is somehow too psychologically not formed enough that I have to stop them from seeing news and information and entertainment on social media. I think that's very infantilizing. Even if there are some harms to some people, we can talk about that. But this, again, kind of like the AI centers, it seems like a dramatic step toward a form of government control over speech, something I would not at all sanction happening in the U.S. and am thankful that I think the First Amendment would prevent pretty aggressively if it ever came to it.
I think you really hit on the big philosophical issues here, right? About speech and suppression and infantilizing children. There's also a practical issue that we're really feeling here in Australia and could potentially spread to the US should they ever go down this path, or to any European nation that goes down this path, which is teens go, I've been cut off from Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, right? Big apps with a lot of safety protocols and a whole lot of people that are employed to make sure users on their platform are safe. But because they need that social media fix, because they're teenagers and everyone has social media, they're off on these apps that I'd never heard of in a million years, who I don't know how safe these places are. I don't know what kind of security checks they're doing. I don't know if the CCP is building up a whole, what this kid does, where, and what we can market to them. That's the kind of stuff where I go, are we making the situation actually worse? Like a teen's flying towards these apps where there could be even worse cases of grooming, of bullying, of all this stuff. But we can sit back and go, well, Mark Zuckerberg had a bad financial return quarter, so therefore we did the good thing.
Yeah, I mean, and when you start talking about those specific harms, bullying, I mean, the most persuasive evidence that came out of what the Facebook files was showing that Instagram was having a negative emotional impact on a subset of users. I think it was 13 to 15-year-old girls, some of them, not all of them, some of them who are using Instagram. Well, look, I'm sorry, if you poll this same group on how school makes them feel, they would also say that it distresses them psychologically, because being a teenager is hard. Being a young girl is hard. Peer competition is difficult. Is the social media harassment and bullying and negative experience worse than what is actually just taking place in young people's lives in school? I don't think so. And it also can provide a healthy outlet. You can meet friends and people who are outside the limited social circles you travel in school. That happens to kids who don't have ease of access to friends. They can meet people in a positive way. They can get interested in things that they can't be exposed to in their normal lives. Now, is that sometimes dangerous and harmful? Absolutely. And we can take steps and have taken steps to make illegal preying on children online, exposing them to sexual content. There are exceptions to free speech, and those are already enforced. It's already illegal to do those kinds of things. So you want to enforce that more aggressively. I am with you. But to suddenly deprive like all people under the age of 16 of access to, let's be frank, to the internet or to the social part of the internet, that seems crazy to me. Like genuinely such an overreaction to a problem we have barely been able to even quantify. I mean, there are cases that they're being litigated of people who were bullied or manipulated or psychologically harmed on social media who tragically took their lives. It has happened. It's awful. But we are talking about a handful of cases, and you're going to take millions and millions of people's access to the world away because in a handful of cases, someone who might have been helped or saved or protected via some less coercive means, something bad happened to them. Should we ban all cars again to prevent car deaths? Seems very dramatic to me.
All right, I know you have to go, but there's one more topic I want to get into, which is the Epstein files. Now, this is something you've commented on a fair bit, and I think it's very interesting. And it's ramped up now because we've had the arrest of Prince Andrew in the UK. He's been released. And also the arrest of Lord Mendelsohn, the former ambassador to the US from the UK. Now, we don't know what happened. These are all allegations at this point, and we need to presume the presumption of innocence. And we should also note that these arrests are in relation to financial things rather than any sex crime things. But this, combined with the fact that Democrats are going to be bringing some of Jeffrey Epstein's victims to the State of the Union tonight. We're recording before the State of the Union. People are probably hearing this after. But they are bringing victims of Jeffrey Epstein to the thing to... they say it's about reminding Trump about what his election promise was on the Epstein. I think it is more trying to portray Trump as someone that has something to hide, and we're trying to bring the focal to him to push, remember this person kind of vibes, which I think is destructive. But where I want to go with this question is, Trump has released so many Epstein files. To this point, there has been absolutely nothing to imply that he personally has done anything wrong. And you would have thought how much emotional investment so many journalists have in being able to be the person that breaks the story that Trump is guilty of something. They would have been pushing this so hard. They haven't found anything. And then there's still the victims coming there. So do we ever get to a point where Democrats and the left and the conspiracy theorists that are wrapped up in Epstein are ever going to be satiated that there's nothing in those files that Trump should answer for?
I am forced to come to the conclusion that the answer to that is no. They will not be satisfied. This situation, the Epstein situation, is becoming such a clown show. It is, I think, should be, people who bought into this should feel humiliated. And I myself, if you had asked me 2 months ago, I would have said, well, of course I support releasing all the files. There are powerful people who trafficked in underage girls, who are abusing them, who Epstein facilitated that, and their names have been covered up by the government. That was the theory. That's what we were told. That's what people who knew more about this insisted to me. Well, we've now seen, we have 3 million pages of documents that shed no light on it, that show, you know, some bad judgment in people who still associated with him, maybe criminal behavior of formerly Prince Andrew and Lord Mandelson and everyone else with regard to financial impropriety. But there's no new evidence of sex crimes against underage people involving anyone but Epstein himself. And now and then they said, well, these names were redacted. And then Ro Khanna said on the House floor, he gave some names, and those were people unrelated to Epstein. This is very controversial to say, but I'm at this point a little worried that we're being taken for a ride by some of these alleged survivors of Epstein, many of whom, if you scrutinize their stories closely, changed them dramatically over time. The figure that Ro Khanna, someone who I previously quite respected, to be totally honest with you, even though he's a Democrat, the person he's bringing, that victim, a so-called victim, and I don't even doubt that she was victimized by Epstein. She also then helped procure underage girls herself for Epstein, not for other people, for Epstein himself. Why is this person being touted and brought to the State of the Union? It's all a deranged effort to get Trump. That is what it is. At first, MAGA was into this because they thought it was going to expose powerful Democrats, and that hasn't really happened again in terms of the sex crimes. And then Democrats seized on it because they thought this was going to bring down Trump. No evidence whatsoever of any wrongdoing by Trump. And at some point, after 3 million pages have been released, you have to either be honest with yourself and say, that's probably because this thing I was told exists, a list of people trafficked by Epstein and Trump was involved, just doesn't exist. I mean, take the Occam's razor at some point, that this was a sensational claim that has not panned out. But these people won't let it go, and these members of Congress, Democrats, and I am now on the side. I was not there at all before. I thought he was wrong about this. I now agree with President Trump when he kind of basically reluctantly said, you know, I'm less into doing this Epstein files release than a lot of other people. I know it's important to people, so we'll look into doing it, but I think you're going to damage a lot of totally unrelated people's reputations to just, to just throw out here all these unproven investigative files that contain lies. He was dead right about that. I admit it. I was wrong. He was right. And I think more people should come around to that.
All right, brilliant. On that note, Robby Soave from The Hill, from Reason. Make sure you're watching The Hill on YouTube. Make sure you're following reason.org. Thank you so much for all your time and appreciate it.
My pleasure. Take care.
Thank you so much for watching that interview with Robby Soave. If you want to keep up to date with all of my videos and all of the other videos we produce here from our excellent commenters here at Sky News Australia, make sure you subscribe to our channel so you can do so now.